Oh. Hello everybody, how's it going? Today I'll be reviewing the 1990 film King of New York, directed by Abel Ferrara and released on 4K by Arrow Films. This was released in 2020. It's 4K only, one disc, and I emphasized Arrow Films before because I'm not too clear on how this company is set up. And if somebody wants to educate me, please do so. Hit the comments. Happy to hear it and happy to understand this better. But from what I could tell, based on a cursory look at highly credible sites like Wikipedia and Reddit, Arrow Video, along with a few others, falls into the Arrow Films parent company. It seems like Arrow Films deals more with classics, and Arrow Video is more like cult classics and horror movies. Nevertheless, they seem to operate as separate entities. This disc in particular was on Arrow Films on the UK site. If you go to arrowvideo.com, you're not going to find it. So it's a little bit confusing how they've set things up, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But again, if somebody wants to educate me, please, by all means. The packaging, there's not a whole lot to it, but one cool thing it has is this reversible sleeve with newly commissioned artwork by Tracy Ching. This, I believe, is the normal artwork, and here's the back side. And then if we flip it over, we can always reverse it and show this, which I'm assuming, because I'm not familiar with this art, I'm assuming this is the new one. I kind of prefer the original, just because I think it evokes the essence of the movie more so than the new art does. But they're both really cool, and that's a cool feature to have, to kind of be able to put this in however you want. As for the picture, this is a new 4K restoration from the original negative by Arrow Films. It's approved by Abel Ferrara and cinematographer Bojan Bazelli. I apologize. I'm always going to apologize with pronouncing names. It's in Dolby Vision, HDR10 compatible, and overall the picture is insanely overcooked. It's drowning in red, sometimes gold, depending where they are. It helped on occasion when the oversaturated blues were there to counterbalance the red, especially the red, but also the gold. But when they weren't, I honestly had to look away, or almost look away sometimes. It was that overbearing to look at. I was curious, so I did compare it to the original DVD, and this new version by Arrow was a lot more saturated than the DVD. Has a lot more red, especially. I mean, it might just be that overall it's more saturated, and so all those colors are popping a lot more. Hard to know exactly what was going on. And again, that's only comparing it to the DVD. I'm not sure how the original, I never saw in theaters, and I wouldn't remember how it looked if I did. I'm not sure if it's the original or if Ferrara and Bazelli went all James Cameron on us and kind of reimagined how this should look when they sat down to do this. The audio is LPCM, original stereo, and remixed. And there's also a remixed track in DTS HD Master Audio 5.1. And I watched it in 2.0 stereo because that matches the original. And that's usually how I prefer to watch things. The original source, I looked at it, is Dolby SR, which stands for spectral recording. And my understanding is that just means it's basically stereo with a noise reduction. On the extras side, they have an audio commentary by director Abel Ferrara and another commentary by composer Joe Delia, producer Mary Kane, casting director Randy Sabusawa, and editor Anthony Redman. Overall, the Ferrara commentary did not blow me away. I don't know a whole lot about him. I've seen some of his films like Bad Lieutenant, and I based on this and that, and maybe a couple other things, I know he has a tendency to really indulge himself. And that kind of attitude came through in the commentary. He just seemed kind of arrogant, and I didn't watch the whole thing, just to be honest. But I started and I was like, yeah, I don't care about this. The other commentary was a little bit better. Again, they were focusing more on kind of anecdotes surrounding the filming and things like that, and that just, like, I'm always more geeked out about what really goes into making the movie that we're watching. One cool thing that I did learn from the commentary is that everything was shot on location, and in hindsight, I'm assuming that's one reason why it got my attention back in the day. I've always appreciated when a film has a strong sense of place, and this one definitely has that. They also have an interview with Ferrara, interview with producer Augusto Caminito, a couple of documentaries about Ferrara, and an image gallery and trailers. I wasn't quite blown away by the actual content, but they do provide a lot to consume if you're interested. So big shout out to Arrow for all that. As for the movie itself, I first discovered this on cable in the early 1990s. And like I said, this movie's kind of always spoken to me, and I was kind of looking back at that time in particular. And that time, it was probably in the very early days of me getting more mature in my viewing. I'd come up in the 80s on the action movies like Rambo and Commando, and that was all the stuff I liked, and Die Hard. And that kind of makes sense because this has a good amount of that. It has shootouts and things like that, which by now I actually don't honestly care a whole lot about. I mean, sometimes they can be fun, but overall, like, that's not what I'm looking for. But it also had a lot of grittiness and style, and again, that sense of place. And I think I gravitated to those things. I think that early on, I can see this as sort of the early steps in what my taste and sensibilities would become as I got older. And like I said, got a little bit more mature maybe in my viewing. I think I've probably seen it once since then, in maybe the past 20-something years. Because I do have it on DVD like I showed. But I bring up all this because I may not be able to maintain objectivity. It's just one of those things that is so formative for me that it's really just hard to look at it as just a movie. It's like trying to go back and look at Empire Strikes Back or Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's like they're just part of my upbringing at this point. Christopher Walken, this is the first thing I ever saw him in, so this has always been my reference point. And that kind of works because I didn't look back at his filmography, but I think this is sort of around the time maybe that he shifted towards playing these gangster types. I'm thinking of True Romance, and I can't think it off the top of my head, but the follow-up to Swingers, I think he was in that and was a gangster, and I think there are other things where he's played a gangster that I'm probably completely blanking on right now that are super obvious. Walken plays Frank White, who's getting out of Sing Sing as the movie opened. I mean, literally, he's taking his first steps out of the cell. And they pick him up in a really nice limo, and here we also get our first sense at how the movie's going to be shot, because it's a long lens, so it's super compressed, and the limo's pulling up out of Sing Sing, I believe is also filmed on location there, and the dusk background or twilight background, the blue hour background, if you will, was just like deep blue and kind of gorgeous. He takes the long way home so that he can see the streets, see what's changed, maybe see what he's going to own in short order. And to that end, he hits the ground running. He meets up with his old crew. He starts shooting his way back into power, taking out one local cartel after another, including the cops, who are fed up with not being able to keep his crew off the streets. And Walken was sort of meant for this role, it just feels like. And again, this goes back to being my reference point for him. But he's the embodiment of cool and in this movie, and that's probably another reason I dug it so much, because he is just so charismatic. From his strut, to the little jigs that he dances, to the way he handles a gun or presides over, what he plans to take by force. He really seems to relish in this and has fun with it, pushing the boundaries of believable behavior for the sake of style and drama. He doesn't even say that much until the end. It's just his presence. The rest of the cast is a who's who of 90s cinema. Larry Fishburne, Wesley Snipes, David Caruso, Steve Buscemi, Giancarlo Esposito, the underrated Paul Calderon, Teresa Randall, who went on to do some good stuff. Most of them are gloriously over the top as well, especially Fishburne, Snipes, Fishburne, Caruso, and I guess Fishburne. But none is more over the top than the cinematography. Again, I'm not sure if it's the original source or the restoration, but it all still kind of works because everything, the cinematography, the acting, the shootouts, any one of which would have brought the city to a grinding halt and made world headlines, to the lifestyles, everything on screen is a masterclass in overindulgence. Ferrara spends as much time on a woman's ass as he does on a champagne flute.
She got a great ass!
The flutes were spectacular, by the way. It's all about style. Ferrara doesn't have time for loose logic, overcooked performances, scenes that come out of nowhere and stay past their welcome. He's just creating a portrait of an exercise in style and self-indulgence. And to that end, it works. And partly because it's consistent, but mostly because the good parts are great. Some of the shots are just breathtaking. When I wasn't thinking I needed to adjust my set, I wanted to freeze the frame and literally turn it into a poster for my wall. It was that beautiful. Sometimes it was that beautiful. One thing that was never quite clear, and this is okay, again, because these kinds of things are more of an afterthought for Ferrara in this movie. But we're never quite sure of Frank's motivations. It's hard to imagine that thinking a brute force takeover of the New York drug trade would end well. But maybe his ego is big enough to delude him of that. Maybe he doesn't care. There's also a story thread about him financing a local hospital and essentially conquering New York to pay those bills. But considering the violence he causes and the harm he causes, that seems more like a bullshit excuse, or a bullshit rationalization, I should say, to help him get to sleep at night. Or it's an indication of his God complex. His concern for the hospital seems legit, but maybe throwing them some money is nothing more than a convenient byproduct of ruling the world, which is, his end goal. Like I said, I was okay with that ambiguity, probably more so than if they spelled it out for us or tied it all up in a neat package. Again, this wasn't what the movie's about. The movie's about the style, and the movie's about, to some degree, the action, to some degree, the location, but it really mostly is just about an exercise in style. And, like I mentioned before, it's hard to rate this objectively, but I give it a hesitant 7, because in what it was trying to achieve, it knocked it out of the park. I mean, really it did, and still a lot of fun to watch. I might have a hard time recommending it to people unless they really know what they're in for, but still, for me, it's still a fun watch. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like it. If you like my channel's content, please feel free to subscribe. If you have something to say, feel free to drop it in the comments. I'll try to respond to everybody. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.